China, Australia and BRI. China has seen a rapid economic growth since 1980, for around 4 decades. The economic growth has made China gain a lot of influence on the global stage. When Xi Jinping took over the leadership of China in 2012, he decided to follow an expansionist international policy, through his One Belt One Road project, OBOR, also known as Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. OBOR, officially started in 2013, later renamed as BRI, was touted as an infrastructure development strategy, adopted by the Chinese government. About 70 countries, including US, and other several Western nations, along with many underdeveloped nations, showed great interest in this program. BRI is the Chinese government's foreign and economic policy, to establish trade routes across the globe, and invest in infrastructure projects in several countries. The projects are supposed to include railways, highways, ports, pipelines, and many other infrastructure developments. When countries like the US, Germany, and Italy welcomed this idea, more nations started believing in its authenticity, and in 2019, it was estimated, around 125 countries have signed Memoranda of Understanding, and the investment was supposed run into trillions of dollars. The only notable exception was India, which took a bold decision of not being part of the BRI project, since it clearly saw through the deception, and focused on the real intentions of the Chinese leadership. Some Western analysts later admired the courage shown by India, and called the Indian Prime Minister, as the only one who had the spine, to stand up to China. The idea of infrastructure development had good reception, in several small, developing countries in Africa, and Asia. But, during many of its implementations there were horror stories of forcible displacement of millions of people, destruction of residences, and arable farms in most of the countries, and created security issues for the host countries. The loan was provided by China to the host country, at very high interest rates, to fund these infrastructure development projects. We'll cover how that debt trap made these countries as colonies, in a separate video. Let's get back to Australia. One of those countries which looked at BRI with great interest, was Australia. In the early stages of BRI, in the 2013-2014 period, it was being celebrated in the Australian press and media, as a win-win situation for both China and Australia, and an opportunity for great friendship and cooperation, between the two countries, though the Australian local and federal governments got involved, only much later. China saw Australia, as a country closely aligned with the West, and with vast natural resources. China believed any economic or political control of Australia, is an indirect leverage on the entire West. Australia looked at China as a gateway for its economic growth, and the largest market for its resources. Australia's exports had been increasing regularly with China, and by 2015, there was a wide range of Australian products that were being shipped to China, including coal, iron ore, other minerals and resources, beef, barley, cotton, lobsters and other seafood, lamb, sugar, timber, wine, etc. Also, the Chinese students were coming in large numbers to study in Australian universities, helping the universities in the process. Australia was now firmly dependent on China for its exports, and when China came in with the idea of initiating BRI with Australia, even though Australia was not fully in favour of it, they didn't have the courage to upset the apple cart in their relationship with China. Let's go through the timeline of cooperation, and the subsequent breakup between China and Australia on the BRI agenda. China had several forums of discussion on BRI, and on one of those forums held in May 2017, Australian Investment and Tourism Minister, Stephen Chobo had attended. This is the first initiative taken by the Australian government, to be part of BRI. Chobo had stated, Australia supports the aims of initiatives, such as BRI, that improve infrastructure development, and increased opportunities. In September 2017, a Memorandum of Understanding was signed between Australia and China, on investing in other countries on infrastructure projects, that can include BRI-related projects as well. In October 2017, then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull of Australia remarked, "We look forward to working with China on the Belt and Road Initiative projects." Global infrastructure investment is a good example of where countries should work together. Though this marked the official communication of accepting Australia's involvement with BRI, it was also the same time, when Western powers, mainly the US, had understood that China had ulterior motives with their BRI, and had warned Australia to stay away from it. Behind the facade of welcoming the BRI project, Australia was already suspicious of the BRI, and China's real intentions behind it. By then, there were already some projects that were implemented around the world, and had drained the host country's resources, and had made the host country reel under severe losses. BRI's true nature was just getting exposed. So, Australia delayed the signing of the partnership in 2017. When questioned the reason for the delay, then Prime Minister Turnbull said, "We prefer to focus on specific projects and investments rather than engaging in generalities." Obviously, the generality of BRI was not the reason why Australia was hesitant to sign up for BRI. Victoria's Memorandum of Understanding with China. Though the federal government of Australia was dragging its feet, they were not vocal on their opposition either. Daniel Andrews, who was the Premier of the Australian state of Victoria, was sold on the idea of partnering with China on a Belt and Road deal, and signed a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, in October 2018. From Andrews' point of view, there were more than 100 countries who were already part of BRI, and projects ranging from hydroelectricity projects in Uganda, rail links in Malaysia, highways in Central Asia, etc., were already being commissioned. So, the Victorian Premier was enthusiastic about the prospects of having a deal that will improve the trade, infrastructure and skill exchanges. The framework of the deal, established on October 2019, focused on infrastructure, and increased the participation of Chinese companies in Victoria's infrastructure construction program. The deal also extended to manufacturing, biotechnology, and agriculture. The scope was widened to make Victoria have their food, agricultural products, and cosmetics, have better openness to the Chinese markets. Despite the details, the agreement, which was supposed to start in March 2020, was not legally binding. The pandemic delayed the start date, but the pandemic also caused deep friction between Australia and China, which led to the eventual cancellation of the Victoria deal, despite the objection of the Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews. Australia's demand for a COVID-19 probe. Australia had demanded a fair, independent and thorough investigation on the origins of the pandemic. China seemed furious to a fair probe, and turned hostile towards Australia, and several Chinese leaders spoke of punishments to Australia. This resulted in high tariffs ranging in tens of billions of dollars, and refusal of honouring existing deals on Australian products into China. China had believed that Australia had too much to lose in a trade war with China, and hence Australia had no choice but to bow down to China, sooner than later. Of course, the tariffs imposed by China did hurt Australia, in many ways, including direct losses, due to loss of exports. When Australia realised the extent of the damage, they tried to reconcile, but China wanted an absolute surrender, which Australia refused. Cancellation of the Victoria deal with China. The Sino-Australian relations got worse during the course of 2020, and the Victoria Belt and Road deal came under severe pressure. The federal government of Australia wanted to scrap the deal, signed by one of its states, Victoria. Daniel Andrews, the Victorian Premier, opposed any cancellation of the deal, and issued statements against his own federal government. Sensing the mood of the Victorian Premier, the federal government of Australia came up with a new provision, called Foreign Arrangement Scheme, which came into force in December 2020. This provision gave the Australian federal government power to override the Australian states on issues related to any agreement signed between the state or other institutions, with any foreign government. With the Foreigner Arrangement Scheme in force, the Australian government scrapped the Memorandum of Understanding, between Victoria and China, signed on October 8, 2018, and the Framework Agreement, signed between Victoria and China, on October 23, 2019. As expected, there was further outcry by the Chinese government against Australia and increased friction between the two countries. By April 2022, the relations between Australia and China have widened further, and Australia realized China is an existential threat, and started acting to safeguard its national interests. The Belt and Road Initiative was now being viewed generally by many nations as a way for China to pour money into a host country, especially a poor and corrupt country, and find a way to seize their ports, and build military bases in that host country, through forcible means. BRI has been suggested by some as a new approach to Chinese colonization. Australia has completely divorced itself from any BRI initiative in its land. Thanks for watching.